What's going on, gang? Welcome back to A Therapeutic Edge. It's very nice to have you here today. I, over the weekend, ordered a new SOG. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's coming, and I'll do a full review. I'm very excited. I have a small, but sort of well-loved SOG collection. This one is new to the collection, but certainly not new. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes and go over what I've got and why I've got them. And I'll post links to where you can find some of these in their various forms down in the description if you're interested. SOG is SOG is one of those companies a little bit like, well, there's a lot of them. Like Schrade is another one. Gerber. These are knife companies that I have known my whole life in one form, well, much of my life in one form or another. And much like those two, Gerber and Schrade, SOG spent about a decade turning itself into a knife company that you just couldn't recommend to anybody for any reason. But a couple of years ago, they decided to flip a switch and make some changes, and I have been on board ever since. Enough that even some of their older, more soggy stuff has made its way into my collection. I think it's interesting now. So let's take a look at what's here as sort of a warm-up, because something's coming. But by the way, over the weekend, they had a big sale, 40% off on the SOG website, which is why I jumped in on one of their sort of newer models. But let's take a look at what you got. This is the CLXR. This is the Spec Arc. This is the Assisted Kiku. This is the Kiku XR, and this is the Terminus XR LTE. This, I love this knife. So their LTE series they make an LTE of this one as well, by the way. What they've done is they've replaced the steel liners or steel frame with carbon fiber. Makes for a very light, very quiet knife. I love this thing, but we'll get back to it in just a second. So these two are a little more indicative of older SOG, but all right, well, let's just start at this end and move our way down. Over here, this is the SOG Seal XR. This is just a tank of a knife, and I love it just for that. I've got a thing for sort of big, bulky, I don't know, I just like big knives. And this absolutely is one of those. It's got a gorgeous S35VN blade, right? It's got inset steel liners. It's got more jimping than almost any other knife I've ever owned. As you can see, it is jimped from the middle of the blade right here at the top of the spine all the way down and basically all the way around to the end of the flipper. Nick Shabazz likes to say of knives like this, it is an ideal knife if you work in a Vaseline factory. And in this case, he ain't wrong. This knife is a little absurd and awesome for it. First, the ergos on this thing are fantastic, at least in my big old bits, right? It fits really comfortably. The jimping is aggressive, but not painfully so. I've carried this thing a bunch camping and out in the outdoors, and particularly with gloves on. This knife is just fantastic. Their XR lock has had some mixed reviews. I'm a big fan. Their XR is a version of a bar lock, which is, of course, a version of the Axis lock from Benchmade. You can see it. I think we can get that to show. You can see it move on the inside, right? That bar locks into this spot on the blade. It's very well sorted. No wiggle, no rock, no nothing. Now, these are a little over $200, which puts them sort of at the top of the Benchmade or top of the Spyderco pricing. This is a lot of knife, and it is a huge, thick slice of S35VN, which is an excellent steel. It's interesting. I've been doing this now for about 4 years, 3 years with a channel. I mean, this level of sort of nutty collecting, I've always had knives, but S35 was a super steel for a very short time, and now it's not. I guess as 45 has come along, everybody's into CPM 20 CV. There are lots of other steels that have caught the attention of the knife world, as it were, but I love well-done S35VN. It holds an edge just exactly as long as you'd want it. It is field sharpenable, which means if you're out in the woods for a couple of weeks and you just have a sharpening rod or something else, you can keep a nice edge on it. Unlike something like S90V, which is really hard to sharpen. Of course, it goes dull, slower, but you get where I'm going, right? S35VN is, to me, at least so far, sort of my favorite balance of rust and stain resistance and edge and overall steel toughness. This thing is all of that in just a monster package. I really like this knife. As I said, these are about $225, a little over $200, about $225. But if you're going to drop a couple of $100 on a knife, particularly if you need one for work, you would not be, well, you'd be in good company if you chose this thing. Next, over here on the table, this is an older SOG. This is the Spec Arc. This is definitely not part of their new sort of generation of knives. I got this from Napster Ninja. It was nice enough to pass this along to me. This, in fact, doesn't even have their new XR lock system. This is called the Arc Lock, which is Spec Arc. Very similar. It is a bar lock. Let's open this up, see if you can see on the inside. This actually has 2 pins, right? It's got a pin right here that holds a steel plate in place, and then when you pull this, it actually rocks the whole plate. See if we can get that to show. Let me do it this way. You see that? Maybe a little. It rocks a whole plate up and out of the way, which locks onto the blade at this little cutout right here. The Spec Arc is a lot more in line with old SOG stuff that I would not have picked up before. It's steel liners, it's FRN scales, it is VG10. I'm not against VG10, but this thing is really pokey, and it's similar in handle design to the one that's coming. For those of you that know your way around SOG, you may know actually what I'm getting based on that, but shh, that's a secret. It's got some weird features. The thumb studs are held on with just a Phillips head screw. The rest of it is, I mean, the arc lock has actually got a flathead spot on it. This is just from a time when SOG didn't quite know what they were trying to be or what they were doing, and yet this knife is ergonomically wonderful, very comfortable, right? Even the little cutout for the thumb studs, right, doubles as a really nice place to lock your finger, and you can come forward if you want to. These were about $120 when you could find them. The one thing they do share is they've got that very, where is it? This one's got a very similar, right? You can see this is generational, right? This sort of aggressively SOG pocket clip. But I do love the blade on this. It's hollow ground. It's got a little bit of a recurve. It's very aggressive, very pokey, in case you were going to give something a prod. This does carry exceptionally well. It's super deep carry, right? Got a nice flexible clip, very much in line with sort of this clip and even the first generation of the Terminus here. But yeah, they've sort of moved away from this. I like everything about this knife. I wish it was slightly better materials. I like the swell at the tail back here. That means that when you're holding on to this thing, it really does feel well locked in hand. Now their VG10 is from Seki City, Japan. As I said, this is an older one, and I've had great luck, particularly with Spyderco's Seki City VG10. I have no reason to believe necessarily, I mean, I don't have any real evidence yet, but I have no reason to believe that this from SOG is any different. This is just sort of a collector's piece at this point, but one that, because of the materials and how light it is very light, it's fun to carry, right? It's almost got that OTF aesthetic, right? But it's got a lovely edge on it. So there's that. That's the Spec Arc. Big knife. There's a full review of that coming as well. Let's move these down a little bit. Next on the table is, until this one, was actually my most recent. Is that right? Yeah, I think. Well, okay. I've had a Terminus for a long time, not necessarily this one, but this was my most recent. I bought this during the COVID lockdown. This is the Kiku Assisted. Now, all of their Kiku knives are recurve. They're all sort of aggressive. This is another one. But this one they released with the same micarta as you have on the Kiku XR. This is an assisted button lock, S35VN, and I love this blade. I just do, right? Big, deep recurve, like really nice edge. It's very pokey, right? It's got this swedge up here at the top. It's very aggressive posture for this knife, and yet, because of the handle shape, really usable. As I said, it's a button lock assist, which means there's no mechanism in here, but when you push the button, you can just rock it closed. It's very snappy on the open, right? Very nice. Not really competitive in sort of their more modern stuff because of the assist, but the S35VN steel, it's got a little bit of a smile down here at the end. I mean, it is still SOG, after all. But still, right, steel liners, no milling. This thing has definitely got some weight to it, like you know it's in hand, but I love the styling. And so it stays too. As you can see, it is also a big knife. Now, next is the Kiku XR. Now, this knife has got 3 or 4 different versions now. This is the original. This one is 2 years old. They make an XR light version of this now. They've made all black. They've made orange and green. But when it first came out, this is the one you could get. And I, in an effort to find out if SOG was serious about turning a corner in their manufacturing and quality and overall build, do I even have another SOG? Hang on just a second. All right, before we look at that, this is what I'm talking about. This phenomenal piece of junk is what SOG was selling right up until they decided to do that. Dude, okay, hold on. Okay, right. This is the SOG Twitch 2. Now this one happens to be in brass, which is you can see is a bronze, which as you can see is really taken on a patina. This knife doesn't work. And it's only 20 bucks or something like that. But I mean, it should work. It's a weird backlock. It's assisted. But if you loosen it up enough that it will open all the way on the flip, then you get blade rock. This is really indicative of what happened to SOG. And then this, the Kiku XR. This is CTS XHP steel, which, by the way, they did their heat treat marvelously. I've had this for 2 years. It has held an edge wonderfully. Fit and finish on this thing is really very good. You can see mine's pretty dirty because I carry this thing a fair amount. But this sort of stone-washed blade has held, there's no scratches, no mars, no marks. The CTS XHP has held an edge beautifully. XR lock works phenomenally, right? You can open this thing up in a number of different ways. It's surprisingly comfortable. Now, these are about 190 bucks, which for anything with the name SOG on it is, before this generation, was absurd. And yet, man, this thing is awesome. I love this knife. I love it because it's weird and yet it still works beautifully, right? It's got this sort of harpoon blade. It's hollow ground right here. It's a compound grind, which I just love in a knife, right? This thing is fantastic. Now, the LTE, the light version of this, really has my attention. And we'll talk about that why in just a second. This is one of those knives that I got because I wanted SOG to be doing better and was just immediately thrilled with the result. Now, it is apparently a little complicated on the inside. I've never actually taken one of these apart because of some videos that I've seen, but I haven't had to. In 2 years, this thing has developed no blade rock, no wiggle, no nothing. All the screws have stayed tight. The the XR lock has continued to work exactly as advertised. It's become a very popular knife for them, and I completely understand why. It's really good. It really is. And it's cool looking, right? I mean, not everything can be that, right? But in the SOGs, you get stuff that's interesting. I mean, they make a version, a very plain sort of knife. This thing is just cool, and it rings all of the bells for me for just a small, like chunky, like aggressive looking, and yet really useful sort of working tool. It's so the way they did this with the recurve ending at this sort of swoop, there's lots of belly, but when you're cutting up media, you hook it inside that recurve, and this thing is phenomenal to work with. Got some jimping, right? You got G10 backspacer, got a spot for a lanyard. It is really just a wonderful knife. Now, I mentioned the LTE version of this. This is the Terminus XR LTE. As I said, that means that they've replaced the steel with carbon fiber. So instead of a steel frame, and even the carbon fiber is milled out, by the way, It's nice. First off, it's very quiet, right? It's interesting how quiet it is. They make a D2 version of this knife. They make an S35VN version of this knife. D2 is steel liners and G10. The S35 is also steel liners and G10. They make a carbon fiber version as well. The carbon fiber on this one is milled a little, got a little bit of grip. I really like this LTE feature. Also, they've gotten rid of the really aggressively SOG clips and given this one a much more traditional deep carry clip. This is, well, honestly, just one of my favorite, hey, I need a knives, right? Like, I love the Bug Out for many reasons. I don't actually carry it because it's so narrow, right? It's wonderful if I'm wearing like super light shorts or slacks, but as an actual like knife that I feel really comfortable holding on and using, it's just a little too thin through the handle. The LTE is about a half an ounce heavier. I think this is 1.8 or 1.7 or 1.8 ounces, and this is 2.3 or 4. You get a slightly longer blade on the Bug Out. But you get a thicker slice of S35VN as opposed to S30V over here on the LTE. This neutral handle, just a little bump back here, right? Now my pinky hangs just into this spot, but I got to tell you, I am locked into this knife. It really is just a joy to use and carry. There's no squeeze. It's a wonderful tool. Now this one, how much are these? I wrote it down. These are about 140 bucks, about $139, which makes them really competitive with the Bug Out. If you like the idea of the ultralight Bug Out, you know, but like me, you find the handle just a little, I don't know, wimpy, like thin. The XR LTE here is close enough in weight as to make no difference in your pocket, really, and just a little thicker and a little easier to hang on to. The coating on the S35VN blade holds up, oh, it's really sharp, holds up really well. I've used this for all the same thing I use all my knives for. I've cut, you know, I do all my test media, seat belts, rubber tubing, 550 paracord, cardboard. You know, I feather stick a little bit just to see how well it will do it. You wouldn't want to feather stick with most of these anyway, but just in case, you know, I do that anyway. And all of their higher end steels, the CTS XHP and their S35VN has held up beautifully. I have not put the VG10 here through its paces yet, mostly because this was a gift, but I will before I do the review. I think it's interesting that between this knife and these knives, they moved away from their, what do they call it, the arc lock? Yeah, the arc lock to a slightly more refined XR lock. Similar idea. It's a, you know, it's basically a bar of metal that reaches down and locks into a cutout in the blade, just exactly like the Axis lock, but they have their own flavor to it. Being a knife reviewer is funny, right? Knives come and go in and out of the sort of public zeitgeist super quickly. And if you've been thinking about picking up a SOG, even a weird one, you know, go ahead. I have heard some people got versions of this where there was some blade rock and things weren't really perfect. That bums me out a little bit, but every one I've gotten so far, and like I said, I've got one coming from the SOG website here. I'll be here in about a week. Everyone that I have gotten, even their older stuff, I mean, who knows how many hands this thing went through before it landed first in Napster Ninjas and then in my hands. And yet, it's in really good shape. So, who knows, right? Even their older stuff that I would have avoided because it's FRN and it's VG10 and blah, 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 blah. My experience with SOG, particularly the new stuff, has been very good, which is why these stay in the collection and why I'm adding newer and sort of weirder stuff to it as we go. At some point, I'll probably pick up a Kiku fixed blade, but those are very expensive. But anyway, this is my SOG collection. It's not enormous. It's not particularly outlandish. It does have some cool bits and pieces in it. If you're looking for knives to collect or knives to carry and use that can put up with some more aggressive use, or if you are looking for something that is very light and yet very, very functional, SOG kind of has you covered. And while I wouldn't say that these are inexpensive, I mean, 139 bucks, not bad. Like I said, bug out price range. They're definitely interesting, and maybe that's enough. And that's where we're going to end it. Like I said, next week, I'll get it next week. We'll go a week with me doing some testing and some carrying, and there'll be another SOG coming to the table. In the meantime, if you have any questions about these, feel free to ask down in the comments below. And I'll put links to the ones that you can still find in the description if you're interested. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. This has been my little tiny but much loved SOG collection. Napster, thanks, brother. I appreciate you, man. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.